Welcome to First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. I'm your host, James Gardner, certified athletic therapist, certified strength and conditioning specialist, yoga instructor, human being. This platform, for the pros, by the pros, anybody in the performance space, and beyond. Welcome here to share in the stories of professionals, experiences, journeys, learning along the way. It's a platform to connect, to network, and to be a part of a community that cares, with conversations that matter, experiences that resonate, and generate ideas, thought-provoking, organic dialogue, passionate pros. Brought to you as always by First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, and Benchmark Athletics, in association with the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. It's First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. Thanks for being here. Thank you for being a part of it. All right, welcome back to Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast, the official podcast of WFAT. Really excited. I think, Ali, I've been trying to line you up for a bunch of time here, always kind of following what you're doing and watching what you're doing. So a pleasure to have you on board. I'll go through your bio and then we'll jump into our conversation here. Our guest today is Ali Kershner, a seasoned professional in both sport performance and business. As a director of Art of Coaching, she has played a pivotal role in shaping marketing, education, and mentorship initiatives with a focus on power dynamics, leadership, and human behavior. Prior to Art of Coaching, Ali was the associate sports performance coach at Stanford women's basketball and women's golf from 2019 to 2021. While at Stanford, she helped the Cardinal to a Pac-12 title and national championship. Before Stanford, she was an assistant sports performance coach at Kansas from 2017 to 2019 and spent the 2 years prior to that as a graduate assistant in the department. In her position, she primarily worked with the women's soccer, women's basketball, swimming, and women's golf teams. Originally from Palo Alto, California, Ali graduated from Duke University in 2015 with a bachelor's degree in evolutionary anthropology, which we'll dive into, I'm sure, at some point. While in Durham, she spent 4 seasons as a member of the soccer team, a captain and goalkeeper for the Blue Devils. Ali and her Duke teams advanced to the Elite Eight 3 times and made the College Cup final in 2011. She earned her master's in exercise physiology from Kansas in 2017. She is a certified strength and conditioning specialist by the NSCA. Ali, an amazing bio, which we can dive into. But first and foremost, thanks for carving some time in out on the West Coast with us here today.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Been looking forward to this, like I said, and I think I sent you a note beforehand, like I'll try not to fanboy. I'm a big fan of what you do and how you deliver your information, and really honored and humbled to have you here and for our guests to be able to sort of follow in your journey along performance, leadership, human dynamics. Like this is kind of the area where we don't really spend a lot of time in the performance space in formal education. So maybe we start kind of there and then work our way around your pathway. But why? Well, I guess maybe we'll start with like, why do you think this gets overlooked in sort of the formal education space, and how important is it to address it once you're in the formal working space?
Yeah, I mean, that speaks directly to why I joined Art of Coaching in the first place. Having worked on the ground level, I spent a lot of time in training rooms and weight rooms and all the different gyms and all these places. And I felt like towards the tail half of that part of my career, I had a pretty good grasp of how to program, how to diagnose. I'm not an athletic trainer or a physio, but you can see, you can understand, and then you can know when to pass along to the experts. But the scientific pieces of it started to really make sense to me. And yet there would be times where I was like, I'm just not seeing X plus Y is not equaling Z. And I couldn't figure out why. So I always kind of had this propensity for understanding the person and trying to kind of dive that human layer deeper, which speaks a lot to maybe the undergraduate work that I did, which I'm still trying to explain to my parents what they paid for. But yeah, I think the the times I had the most success was not because I had written the best program. In fact, you would probably look back at those and be like, what the heck was that? It was the times that I came into the training room or the weight room and I looked at the team that I had in front of me, the athletes I had in front of me. I asked a few questions. I collected some data about sleep and stress and all these things. And then I just made it a super well-educated guess, if we're being honest, based on what I knew about human behavior and their personalities and the facial expressions that I was reading and the conversations I had had while they were warming up. And I made a pivot. I was like, we had this, this plan, and I decided to do something completely different. And we did what we call a whiteboard workout, where you just throw something on the whiteboard. And, I always like look back on those and I say to myself, those were the times I was the best coach, and why. And so, that's when I really wanted to dive deeper into that stuff, because I was like, this is the stuff that we don't, because how do you teach it? Right. Like it felt at times random, and it felt at times like, how could you possibly teach somebody this in a structured curriculum? And so I was like, I feel like that's such a missing link, such a gap, because other coaches and other, trainers and other physios were having these same conversations, and there was nothing to turn to. So, I mean, I would love to know from your experience too, like because I know you're interested in this stuff, where that came from, but that was my kind of intro to it.
Yeah, no, I think that the science behind it and reps and sets and movement schematics and all these things, we can learn the base foundation and we can be experts in those base foundations, but expertise certainly has like an artful eye to it as well, in terms of reading the room or reading the dynamics or reading the personality or the perceived feel of the room. And I think like the whiteboard's great. I mean, I'm a big whiteboard guy, big visual guy, so that doesn't appeal to everybody either. But the educated guess part that you spoke on, and then sort of speaking to the human or the group of humans that you have in the room and allowing that to kind of direct. Rigidity in planning allows us to see a schedule and kind of work backwards, or sort of put macro cycles or micro cycles in place. But what you do with that time and how you navigate it, I think, is ultimately how you make the impact, right? And it doesn't come down to the best program in terms of, did we nail those 8 movements that everybody has to be able to do? But did that person nail the 8 movements in their own way and manage, all the other things that you touched on? So real life application at the ground level, I think, is, I don't know, it's foundational, it's critical. So how do you navigate into it? I think there's an element to this that requires experience, right? It's time under tension, time under load. And in our case, maybe the load is working with other human beings and seeing like how effective are we actually in being able to step back. So I guess, was there a period for you where you kind of consciously stepped back and looked at what you're doing, or was it always kind of on the run, on the floor kind of thing in your experience?
Yeah, such a good question. I think there's a very specific moment that I can point to. I started the first probably 5 or 6 years of my career, I was very by the book. I was very into the science. I was very into the, what are the experts saying here, and trying to truly try to create that perfect program, which is obviously an impossible feat, and not one to chase. And I think what happened was I started to realize that kind of programming, that kind of approach might work for certain populations, but the population in front of me was different. And this caused me to take a step back and wonder, I have, in collegiate, athletics, you have 4 years with these individuals. And I stopped and I asked myself, what do I want them to take away from this time? And the reason I actually asked myself that question is because when I was at Kansas, it was during finals week, which is like their final exam period. And during this period, we just have open hours in the weight room. And during the open hours, I like to just kind of tell them they could do whatever they wanted, right? Like, you don't have to follow your normal program. You can do 5 sets of 10 dumbbell bicep curls and call it a day. I don't really, just, get your mind right, like, and then get out of there and go take your test. And I had more than a handful of athletes say, well, I don't know what to do. And I was like, well, just do whatever you want. And they're like, well, I don't even know where to start. And I started kind of questioning, like, have I even taught them anything like this? Why don't they know what to do? I don't want to just have to be the person that just always has this very regimented program that they have to follow. I want them to have some exploration, some play, some ideas, some creativity. And there was none of that. My programming was devoid of any creativity, any room for failure even. And, of course, there's a certain extent of failure that you want to limit when working with that population. But that's when I started asking myself that question. I have 4 years with them. What do I want them to take away from this experience? And I was like, sure, get faster, stronger, better movers, of course. But more than anything, I wanted them to learn about themselves, about their bodies, about how they moved, what they liked, what they didn't like. And I realized that the way that I had been programming and my approach did not support that outcome whatsoever. And so in that moment, I made a very deliberate choice after talking to some other coaches in the field that do this to introduce play and creativity into my programming. And we can have a conversation about that, but it was very difficult to relinquish some of that control. And because, you like to have this well-oiled machine. Everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. And you walk into the weight room, who's in charge, what's going on. And to kind of take my hands off of that and give them ownership over it, it was the best thing that I did. And it totally changed the way I coached. It totally changed the outcome that I got. And that's the one thing I look back on and I'm probably most proud of in my coaching career.
Yeah, amazing. And you had some terrific experiences, some really big Division I schools in the NCAA, and going from the Southeast, I guess, to Midwest to now far West, or where you are now, but also you're at Stanford. Was there anything along the way, like in your time at Duke as an athlete, coaches, people that sort of influenced you in this way? Did without naming names on the ones that maybe didn't do it the way that it aligned with you, but were there things you saw, or was it sort of just like fall into line and do everything that's required of you? Or was there some questioning on your part, I guess, as an athlete too, that kind of maybe primed you for turning yourself into the coach, the person, the human that you are in that space?
Yeah. My time at Duke was an incredibly formative and positive experience from a weight room standpoint. I was a goalkeeper, and anybody who's worked in around soccer knows that there's one that plays, and by and large you maybe carry 3, maybe even 4 on your roster, and 2 through 4 don't see a whole lot of playing time. And so, especially my first and second year, I had to find ways of expressing myself and finding success outside of playing time, which is how I found the weight room in the first place. I was like, this is one place that I can see effort translate into results in some way. So I fell in love with the weight room. I had the unique experience of one main strength and conditioning coach that worked with us. We also had we had a separate conditioning coach, Jeff Hauser, who's US track and field gold medalist, in just so like we had this incredible wealth of knowledge from that standpoint. And then we had just this community of other coaches and interns and all these different, kind of influences on our team who I got to experience. And because I was so interested in the weight room, I would just go hang out there and actually like eat my lunch and like hang out with them. And I was like,
I love that.
kind of weird looking back on it, but I was just a total gym rat. And because of that, they let me intern while I was still a student athlete.
Nice.
And so I got to like get in front of my peers and coach while I was still there. And not my direct soccer teammates, but some of like the other sports. And that was, getting at that early age, hands-on, so many different sports, so many different athletes, and getting to work with so many different coaches. Like I had one coach tell me that I couldn't, I didn't know what to do with my hands. Like, and I think this is like an actual thing. Like when you're on the floor, you're like, what do you do with your hands? Right. You like, don't want to just have them like straight your sides. Like you want to be engaged, but like, so he would make me hold a piece of paper and a pen as I was coaching, because he's like, this makes you look more purposeful. Like you, Like you're not just walking around with nothing to do. So like those kinds of influences got me those early reps at just seeing and experiencing different types of coaching.
Cool. And then the transition from playing almost seamless to becoming a coach, like when you transitioned or transferred over to Kansas and became a coach. Difficulties are pretty easy transitioning from playing into coach and still being fairly young, right? Like right out of it and then right back into it.
Yeah, I think the difficulty more so, I for some reason I never saw myself playing beyond college. I was always super interested in school and was kind of ready to start my career. And I didn't know what my career was going to be. I was just like ready to start. And I kind of fell into coaching by accident. I meant it more so as a way to get graduate school paid for. And I really wanted to be a sports scientist. I worked for Sparta, which is a force plate and software company out here in the US. And I had interned with them during high school and college, and honestly was using this as an experience to kind of see applied technology and kind of get some experience with that, because Kansas had 6 force plates built into the weight room floor. Like we were like very early adopters. This was back in 2014, 2015. So, you know, like that was kind of the impetus for taking that role. And then I fell in love with coaching. I was like, I need to be on the floor. Like if I have to be behind a computer all day, I'm just not going to make it. So the harder transition for me, to be honest with you, is as much as I liked coaching, I'm an introvert. So I remember having to have conversations with myself before like my 5th session of the day, just be like, hey, get it together, fix your face. You're going to be fine once you're out on the floor. And just like, you know, kind of like almost artificially elevate my energy until I kind of could start feeding off of the energy of the room a little bit. So that was almost a tougher transition than like the identity piece.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an interesting capture too. Like in this space, I think sometimes we see the role, sometimes we see some of the defining points of the role as like being able to program, being able to do this, being able to do that. But like the relatability piece is definitely one that gets it takes experience to navigate. But the next piece to that is like the self-care piece, or the piece of like, what do I need as a coach or a performance or a sports scientist or somebody in this space in order to be able to give all the time. Like your energy can't suck, or you know what's going to come, or what the response is going to be to the athletes. You can't be really in a bad mood when you're coaching. You can't be the coach that's yelling, because that's only going to get through to maybe 4% of the room. So I mean, a really interesting capture. So let's maybe switch gears there. Like along the way, obviously you mentioned, failure to a certain degree as an athlete, self-reflective pieces along the way. Like how critical is that to you, I guess, in what you're doing now and what you've done in the past, in terms of like, how do we coach people to be a little bit more self-aware, self-reflective? Like those pieces, I think, are things that when we strip the autonomy away, when athletes are given a program, a meal plan, a schedule, their courses, somewhere along the way they kind of lose themselves, except for those certain individuals that can sort of navigate that and do their own thing. So how do you navigate that, I guess, as a professional, and then with athletes? Like what are the pieces, not all the secrets, but some of the secrets to sort of, encourage those pieces as equally as important to how much weight is on the bar, or I don't know how it fits.
Yeah, let me touch on both of those. I'll start with like personally, and then I can speak to the athletes and helping them. From a personal standpoint, I think it's an evolving process that never ends and should never end in terms of reflection, self-awareness. The one thing that I think, because I think there's a lot of great stuff already out there about how to become more self-aware. One of the pieces that I recently learned comes from a psychologist named Dr. Tasha Eurich, and she has this book called Insight, and she likes to separate internal self-awareness and external self-awareness. And this has been huge for me because I didn't realize that they were different. She talks about being internally self-aware is like an understanding of your values and what you care about and what you believe in and what's important to you, and more of a kind of who you are internally. And external self-awareness is, are you aware of what you give off and how others perceive you? Or are you sort of or are you kind of unaware of that, which would look like the person that probably shows up very similarly in many different environments and doesn't become the person that can read the room and understand and maybe even shift. So I think there are people that can be one without the other, and there are very few people who are both. And so identifying which one you maybe are already and which one you aren't, I think is a really critical piece. I think what I thought I was is different than what I actually am. I am very externally self-aware. I'm very aware of how I come across to others, to the point of almost maybe even adapting too much occasionally to the environment, the people, the situation, and that comes from maybe not being internally aware enough of what I need, who I am, what I value, and not sacrificing those things. And so I think that was a big kind of aha moment for me in the last few years of identifying that gap and trying to drill in a little deeper on, some of the things like values, and I always had a hard time with that, because I like, these words like values and who are you, because they're often nebulous and hard to define, and they're different for everyone, and maybe at times even a little bit, well, they change, right? So they're hard to even pin down that way. And so I was trying to figure out what's a better way of approaching how to figure out what you value. And so I not too long ago also stumbled upon a set of questions that I found were really helpful in terms of identifying values, that weren't just like an exercise like, so write down your values, but more so questions along the lines of, what is the one thing that motivates you to get up in the morning? What's the one thing that scares you the most? What's the one thing that you wouldn't sacrifice for all the money, all the fame, all the, and those kinds of questions tend to be easier to answer, and also are defining of values, right? And so I think that is where my process is right now in terms of awareness, and trying to kind of just add little layers and little pieces, and just know a little bit more about myself as I go. But I also think the other thing is having incredibly aware and honest people around you. Because this is another thing that Tasha Eurich talks about, is the idea of a loving critic, which is the person that will tell you the truth, but will also has a vested interest in you. Like they want you to succeed. And so I think being able to ask those people, which is probably not your mom, probably not your spouse, but asking those people, how you question very specific questions, not like, what do you think my values are? But I think being able to have real conversations with them about, what am I good at? What am I poor at in terms of communication or leadership or any of these things that you might be interested in. And that's been an interesting and important piece for me, because I realized I don't have enough of those around me.
Right. And finding those people can be also difficult, because that also takes time, right? Like people who are really going to see you and evaluate you, that aren't, that are respectfully critical, I guess, and
Yes.
able to provide feedback that's of value to you, but also of value to the environment or the space that you're in, right? So this is an amazing sort of dive into that. I think like that, the awareness piece of both internally and externally, and I want to sort of bring that back around to your your transition in the gym space, to adding a little bit more creativity and play with athletes, and being aware enough to see that that's necessary. I'm in a lot of different spaces right now, and so we're adding that in on with regularity to our high school population and our elementary population. But there's also this like public perception that that's not specific enough to the hockey player or to the lacrosse player. Like they should be doing all these things. We see them on Instagram, or we see what the highest level athletes are doing. Why aren't our kids doing that? And I mean, the science will tell you lots, but the fluidity of states that you touched on, both internally and externally, how is that received, I guess, like the play and creativity piece, maybe if you want to dive into like what that looked like or what that felt like, but like perception of the type A personalities or the coaches is not always like, oh, you must know what you're doing because you're the person that has the notebook and the pen in the hands and you look very, that way in front of the room. So wherever you want to take that, I guess, in terms of building that in or embedding that and navigating the perception from the outside, I guess, looking in.
So good. So I think I'm really glad that I actually started the way that I did, with this kind of very specific, almost strict, very methodical approach to training, because that one kind of set the standard expectation for the athletes. It also taught them the foundational pieces of movement that would be necessary to add on that layer of freedom, creativity, even like, structured or controlled chaos, if you will. It also, I think, established some credibility with our coaching staff of like, I actually, this is what I do know what I'm talking about, right? Like there's some purpose behind this. And I think that's also built through the conversations that you have. And are you able to explain why you're introducing this? Because it's not just like, oh, let's have some fun, but like, there is a very scientific reason why I'm introducing this. Like there are thousands of benefits of play and creativity in the movement space, and we could kind of dive into those, but just from a practical standpoint, let's just go back to something you said earlier with how structured and regimented their schedules are. They wake up, and from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed, they have their schedule defined for them. There's no opportunity for them to make a decision, except for maybe, do they want chicken or do they want pork for lunch? Mm-hmm. Truly, practice is 4 hours of structured everything. They have study hall, they have class, they have all these things. And so I thought, if I can even introduce, let's say 5 to 10 minutes where they get to make decisions and maybe even fail and just have some fun and maybe even laugh, that's an incredible jolt of stimulus to the system even. And so being able to explain it was how I kind of rationalized the perception on the outside, and having I think the trust and the buy-in already from our coaches that I was, very intentional in what I was doing. From there, I mean, like the way to actually implement this kind of thing into your programming, I think, is so population dependent. I was working with, let's not forget this, like I was working with Stanford student athletes who are maybe the most intelligent athletes you will ever deal with. I mean, we're talking about like NASA engineer level. I don't know what that is in Canada, but
probably just depends on NASA, so not a problem. Yeah.
Aerospace engineers, right? Like, and just like lawyers and doctors all on our team. And I think because I had set that foundation of the first year and a half that I was there, it was very structured. It was very like, we drew from a lot of different things, but like, I love 5-3-1. I love like this, just sort of more traditional bread and butter strength and conditioning type practice. That's how I was kind of raised in the profession, and always saw great results from it. And so having that as the baseline, and then slowly introducing small pockets of choice. So for example, it wasn't like one day walk in, hey, do whatever you want. Like I had said to that athlete during the finals period, it was like, hey, today during the warm-up, I need you to get from this cone to this cone. I don't care how you do it, but it's got to be different every time you do it. Go down and back 4 times. Or, we're going to, we would introduce like little games, little activities, little, even like an obstacle course during the warm-up. The warm-up is such an underutilized part of the workout, in my opinion.
Right.
And that's where I first started to introduce it. And then only after they were kind of like bought into this idea of play and creativity. And I would tell them, I'd be like, this is why I'm doing it. It wasn't just like I just slipped it in there like vegetables into your smoothie. Yeah. It was, everything was explained. And then we would build on that. Hey, today you have in your first series of movements, you have a squat variation. And I'd give them like a word bank on the side of all the different squat variations that they knew. And I would make it bilateral. I'd be like, you don't get to pick a single leg squat today. Like we're going bilateral. And I'd have back squat, I'd have front squat, I'd have belt squat, I'd have safety bar squat or trap bar deadlift, even, because I knew these aren't professional weightlifters, they're not power lifters. The specificity of the movement is, to me, less important than their intent and their ability to increase load. So if it feels better for them to trap bar deadlift than it does to back squat, fine, because they're going to load that bar up way heavier than they are if they're doing some movement that they don't enjoy or that doesn't feel good. So I found as soon as I made that change, our loads went through the roof. I mean, because people, they weren't holding back the way that they were if they didn't like or didn't feel good in the movement. And then that would be it. Like there'd be one movement that would give them choice in. And then over time, more and more became choice. And we kind of, it was a feel it out kind of process from there. But to your point, not everybody liked that. Like I had some athletes say like, I don't want to pick it. And it was almost like a cognitive load to them to have to pick, to have to decide. And so that was like, okay, well, that's a different beast to tackle. But I understand that to a certain extent. Like if you're taking in all of this all day long, sometimes you do just want to kind of not zone out, but just like, I just want to, be told what I need to do and I'll just do it. And so that was an interesting piece to navigate that I didn't anticipate at all.
Yeah, it's like I don't know, probably me in the kitchen is like if I don't have a recipe, I'm a disaster. You know what I mean? So like I don't know what to do or what order to put things in a pan or a pot. So like just tell me what to do and I can make it happen. But yeah, exactly. And that can happen all the time. So but I love that in terms of like specificity of movement, sort of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but sort of coming a little bit secondary to adaptability and variability of movement, which also grooves different things neurologically for athletes and relatability to the space, right? And to the coach and to the people that are all in the room is watching that you don't have to be this robot all the time. And it allows for that little bit of freedom. So I love the take and I love sort of capturing that. And again, comes back to, I think your self-awareness piece and your awareness as a coach and a professional in the space of being able to, I kind of look at it as like having a big enough ego to be able to step back from your own ego and get out of your way, right? And just being fluid in the space. So really great captures. A little bit of time at Stanford, obviously, that you touched on. Any sort of like major differences for, our Canadian and sort of international listeners? Duke is a massive school in North Carolina, and then you go to Kansas, which is a massive school in sort of the Midwest US, and then you end up on the West Coast at Stanford. So three very well-established programs in all of the sports and educational institutions as well. Anything similarities or differences sort of, I don't know, from coast to coast?
Well, I think the one thing that is so fascinating about the American system is the investment in these collegiate athletic departments. I was incredibly fortunate to have three different schools where there was no if you could demonstrate the value, there was no limit to what they would invest in. And so it's actually very interesting, and this was something that I didn't get to experience, and I wonder how I'd be different for it, because I didn't have to come up in a program where we had a limit on resources, or we would have to train out of a broom closet, or we would and you think about like from a constraints-led approach, right? If I had no constraints, did that influence the way that I became a coach? Because I always had access to everything I needed to and more, right? Like I almost was like this wealth of technology and coaches and all these things. And I wonder if that made me a worse coach, because I didn't have to adapt to some of those things. But from a difference standpoint between the three, culturally, for sure, the type of athlete that they were recruiting, absolutely. And I think that's what also drove my I guess piqued my interest in human behavior, is like, okay, the population that I have at Stanford, I was able to coach the way I was because of who they were and the level at which they came in and the expectations that were set and the culture that was set for them. very different from the culture and the expectations of the population at Kansas. Incredible in different ways, but I really had to sit with and ask questions of and understand, because I would also say Stanford and Duke are very similar, very rigorous academic institutions. People go to those schools first for school, and maybe secondarily for the athletic. Or there's no way that you go to that school without wanting to also excel in school. And I think that was what I was used to. So when I got to Kansas and I was like, these kids maybe aren't as motivated by what's after in the terms of their career, or their academic rigor wasn't as important to them. That was an interesting kind of how do I communicate with these people? How do I motivate them? What's interesting to them? How do I get them excited to come and train every day when I couldn't just fall back on the same things that would have worked for myself or the athletes I was used to working with.
Yeah, awesome. And I think that's it, right? Full circle back to where you started, is knowing who's in the room, and then taking that on as part of coaching. The best coaches are the ones that can find, the way to connect, the way to put the right thing on the whiteboard at the right time, and support of the human being that's going to do the thing, but also in a manner that is still science-based, or at least science informed, and moving in the direction of performance on the field. Yeah, and an abundance of resources. I mean, first of all, must be nice, and then second to that, any hindrance with that, when there's just like resources everywhere you turn, everybody's got opinions, everybody's got their, I don't want to say I wasn't there, but different departments and different things with all different MOs behind what they're doing or what they need to achieve or accomplish or validate. Was there any sort of hindrance along the way with having that many resources? Because I see your point as like, if I had it all, I wonder what I would have done if I was placed down in the middle of an island with only nature to work with, that kind of thing, something like that. So the other side is, you have all these resources that can sometimes potentially, put up roadblocks. Or did you experience any of that? You don't have to say where.
Yeah, for sure. I think the roadblock primarily in the sense of, I have it, so I should use it. And I think that that's where we're at as a society with training, and even probably on the medical side as well. Just the more bells and whistles we introduce, the more Instagram, sexy exercises that come about. There's this temptation to want to do those things, to have to utilize all the tech to dive into the nitty gritty and the RSI and all of these different, fun variables that are to track. And I think if there's not a foundation set and there's not an understanding of the basics, then like a pursuit of these other things can totally derail your program. And I would constantly find myself saying, I have to come back to what works. What do I actually want to track? What's actually going to inform decision-making? And forget the rest. You can't do everything. You can't, especially if you're the coach and the sports scientist. Like, there's just no way. And you have 150 athletes. And so I think it was a great practice in Occam's razor, right? Like the simplest answer is usually the right one. And like, can I come back to that? And can I like justify what I'm doing, as opposed to just following this thread because it's fun and exciting for me, I would say.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think like that's our society, that's our space. Knowing when and how to utilize those resources for your own purposes, but the purposes that serve in the best manner too, right? So really cool, and love hearing about all your experiences along the way and your journey along the way. Maybe we'll just kind of like take this to where you are now and what you're doing now, moving out of the collegiate space and into, how does performance, or coaching in the sport performance space, how does that transfer? How does that how do you apply that, I guess, in the non-sport space with what you're doing, as well as you're not at the institution and you're working with athletes? How does that play? How does that work? How do you become a part of a system when you're not necessarily employed by the institution or the team that somebody's playing for?
Yeah. I think what's so interesting is, one, I was so fortunate in the sense that Art of Coaching, and the role that I took on there we were getting to help people still in sport, and outside of sport. Sure. So I was still able to have these relationships and understand the people that I was working with. And that was a very seamless transition because I was a coach working with coaches and just teaching a different thing. I think the hardest thing for myself was reminding myself that even though I'm not coaching performance, I'm still coaching, because the word coach is obviously a much bigger term than what it's often associated with, which is like this very specific, maybe sport related endeavor. And I think once I realized that it's very, very similar, and I was already doing it. I was applying the practices that we would try to teach at Art of Coaching and help others understand. I was already doing many of those pieces, and now having some more formulaic or more strategic approaches to that was so awesome, because I was then able to turn around and tell the coaches who are like myself, who are like, I care about this stuff. I know I need to build trust. I know I need to have buy-in. I know I need to better communicate, but like, how do I do that? And then to be able to say like, hey, listen, why don't you try this specific approach? Here's a framework to help you understand this. Here's 4 communication styles that your athletes or your coaches might have. Can you understand those? And then use that to tailor the message that you're trying to get across. Because there's so many tie-ins between sport and life and business and all of these, because they're all human centric. And so the stuff we were teaching was about humans. And so in my eyes, it is the most transferable, the most scalable thing that we can do. And while the language and the terminology is going to change, the principles don't. And so, I'd be happy to share some of those things that would be kind of transferable, I guess, amongst different spheres, if you will. But I think one of the most interesting ones is the idea of drives, and understanding the drive of the person or people that you're working with, and how that, which is a subconscious influencer of behavior, very deep, like, in the cerebellum, how that influences the way we make decisions, the way we communicate, the way that we receive information. And no matter if it's in sport, no matter if it's in business, no matter if it's in leadership, that is probably the number one ticket to having your message or your what you need people to understand come across in the way that you do. So for example, like there's like this that comes from Dr. Anthony Damasio out of USC, Southern California. He talks about there's 6 different drives that people have. And there's a quiz, a free quiz on the Art of Coaching website that if anybody is interested, they can go take a little, like almost like a BuzzFeed quiz and figure out what they are. But it's artofcoaching.com/what drives you. And the different drives, for example, are achievement, somebody who's driven by always wanting to do more or understand more or learn more. I'm an achievement drive. I can't go anywhere without listening to a book or a podcast or feeling like I've done something productive with my day. So if somebody wants to communicate with me, being able to put it in terms of what I'm going to learn from this, or how this is going to make me better in some way, or how it's going to help me accomplish more, I'm sold. And this is like think about it from like a marketing standpoint, from motivating me as an athlete standpoint. There's so many tie-ins there, right? Like anytime I see like an Instagram ad for like, this will save you 10 hours, I'm like, done, because it feeds on that achievement drive. If somebody were to tell me as an athlete, like, hey, if you do this, it's going to help you get more playing time, or it's going to allow you to stay healthier, done, achievement drive. But that's just one of the 6, right? There's, I'll give you another example of one. There's a security drive. These people they like to have a plan. They like to know what's coming. They like to understand, and feel prepared. So again, if you have an athlete, you have a client, you have a spouse who's a security drive, they're going to want to know, what is the plan, right? So if you want to communicate successfully with them, you'll say, hey, Would love to go on vacation. Don't worry, I've already thought about who's going to take care of the kids. I've already found a place for the dog to go. By the way, like the itinerary set, or I'd love to plan the itinerary with you. That like eases that security drive, and they're like, okay, awesome. So like just having understanding of these drives is your key, if you will, to unlocking anything that you need from them, or that if you want just to communicate with them, right? So I think like that kind of stuff is so fascinating.
Yeah, what a pearl, what a find. Again, we'll put that up in the notes for the podcast where people can find that what drives you and the 6 different drives through the website. And I think again, it just highlights, and maybe this kind of like close us out here as just to where we started and come full circle. You highlight how an individual or an athlete can understand what type of driver they are. Again, you do that thing of putting the autonomy in the athlete's hands, as opposed to like, no, I'm doing it this way, and so it better get through to everybody that's in the room. How important is that, I guess, overall? Like, how does that affect your ability to then communicate? I mean, I know you've hammered it home throughout, both, you know, outrightly and through the conversation, but this is a really big one for me. It's like can the athlete, because not everybody, the athlete, the human being, truly identify that on their own, because not a lot of us can, myself included, until probably a few years ago, and knowing that that's fluid and dynamic and can change. I don't always have to be, you know, achievement driven. Maybe sometimes I am that security person. Maybe I'm a little bit more percentage of that than I am of that. But having that self-awareness as the athlete and being able to display that to you, the coach or the instructor or the whoever, then allows that dynamic to be much more, let's keep using the word fluid, but back and forth in terms of understanding each other, right? And how to connect.
Yeah, it's sort of like this this vicious cycle of, if you will, like that in order to better help you identify how to be self-aware, or how to get you interested in being self-aware as an athlete, I have to first know what motivates you or what drives you or how to communicate with you. And so it's like this really interesting like circle of which there's no start and no stop. But I think the interesting part is that not everybody is going to be interested in being self-aware for the same reasons. And so figuring out why might this individual benefit from being self-aware, that's I think where I would start, because I think if not everybody is just introspective. Some people, they just do. They're action oriented. They're maybe slightly less reflective. I'm much more of the analytical, like to understand, like to process, like to think before I do. So of course, self-awareness is interesting for me to understand, because it's another layer for me to try to figure out before I take action. Because when I take action, I want it to be good and efficient. So I think if you have somebody who's not like that, figuring out what is important to them, what are they trying to get after, and how are you going to frame how self-awareness is going to help them in that, you know. And I think that's a really interesting question. I'm not that kind of person, so I don't know what would motivate that kind of person to be more self-aware, other than maybe if they're results oriented. And if you said like, hey, you caught them after a streak of losses, or maybe or of poor performances, and you just are able to be real with them and say, do you know why? Do you know why you're not hitting the performance metrics that you're after? And just helping them understand that there is a different way, but it's going to take some thinking that they're maybe not used to implementing into their process, and then making that thinking not so large, I think, and keeping it more targeted and specific, because I think that being self-reflective and being self-aware can be scary to someone who's never broached that before. And so introducing it in a way that's maybe small and very specific at first, I think would be the method. But it's a fascinating question that I don't think that any of us know the answer to. Otherwise, we'd all be doing it, right?
Yeah, no, and I think sort of for if nothing else, sort of sparks that in our listeners who may be in school, maybe relatively new, maybe and in their practice for a long time. There's always like that one person that I just can't get through to that person, or I just don't know how. But maybe if we start again, coming back to the foundation, being rock solid there, and if our foundational question is, who are you? You know, what are your values? What motivates you? How can I help you? By answering some of these questions, you can almost lay out your plan pretty straightforward without all of the I don't know, technological resources or even programs as we know them sort of specifically when reps and sets and movements, like, that stuff. I think you get a pretty good foot up on how to work with somebody and how to give them advantage in your space, whether that's on the treatment table or transitioning back to sport or in sport or on the gym floor. Critical analysis of who you're working with, right?
And to that point too, because I think that sometimes that question, like, who are you and what do you care about and all these things, it's actually a very difficult question to answer if you've never thought about it. And so I think being able to almost like give them I would literally come up with like a fake person that has the attributes of each of these people, of each of these different communication styles or drives or whatever. I'd say, which one do you feel like you are most like?
Yeah.
I think that being able to point to ones that are already semi-defined is a much easier task than having to come up with those answers on your own and having to pull those answers from somewhere in your brain. And so I think that's why having things like archetypes, and these are all things that Brett, my boss at Art of Coaching, talked about in his book, Conscious Coaching. Being able to look at those, the drives, look at those and say, oh, I'm like this, or this person's like this, as opposed to these open-ended questions where you're just having to try to, think harder, as opposed to just, like identify what's already out there, I think. And then be like, okay, I'm like this, but maybe like I have characteristics of this other kind as well. Because nobody's ever just one thing, right? You're always a mix.
Yeah, and then handing that over, obviously, as like, I think about it on like a history intake, where in school we're taught like age, sport, what time of season, what handedness are you, what are you here for, what's your injury, what's your past history. Like, these are bigger questions that I think make a much bigger impact in how you're going to handle a situation versus what hand they are or what point of the season. Like, you can always figure that stuff out, but if you don't start with getting to know the person, I think we miss the boat. And trying to do that later on is sometimes a little bit more arduous or difficult to do, right? Coming from behind it instead of leading with that, where now, wow, this person really does want to know who I am, and that's an automatic, check in the box of this person cares about me and about helping me, maybe.
And I think there's so much pressure on having to collect all that information up front. And I think that in truth, you can get a lot of it. And I think that's so important to get like more of a, what we call like a psychographic understanding of this person, not just a demographic understanding. But every interaction with this person that you're going to have going forward is going to give you nuggets of information that's going to tell you how to communicate with them. And if you have some way of capturing that, I always just had a note on my phone on the notes app for each, athlete that I worked with. And no matter what they said to me, I found some way to relate that back to how to communicate with them or what motivates them. Even if somebody was like, hey, how was your weekend? What'd you do? Oh, I baked cookies and I talked to my brother for a few hours, and I went to the farmer's market. Okay, awesome. Why'd you go to the farmer's market? Oh, I just like really like kind of being a part of the community, and it's just fun. Or like little, like from there, like I don't know for sure, but I'm drawing on the fact that community is important to them. Like they liked being outside, they like interacting, they talked to their brother for a few hours. Like there's little things there that if you just pay attention, they're telling you exactly what's important to them. And if that goes into the player profile, if you will, or the intake sheet that you have, over time, you've got this like incredible resource from which you can pull from to show that you care, show you build trust with them, and show them that you're invested in them as a human being, which will lead to anything that you want them to do from a training, a treatment, a rehab perspective.
Yeah, I love that. A great capture, and sort of maybe a little bit more formulaic in terms of how we lay that out, or it's not the notes page or the history, observation, palpation, special tests that we see and we're taught in school, but it is a piece that is educational and can be a little bit, again, sort of different from person to person, but provides massive insight. So really great captures. I'll leave this just so I don't take any more of your time. I know it's morning out there and you probably got a bunch of places to go and do and get outside and do some of those things too. But really appreciate your time and carving this in. We should do it again, down the road and reflect back on this one and see how far things have come and how much things have changed as well. But Ali Kershner, our guest today on Let's Chat. I'll let you take it away with whatever you want to leave us with, but I'm truly appreciative of your time and all the hard work that you're doing, always following. We'll leave it in the notes for everybody to pick up as well.
No, I appreciate you and this community, and just always good to connect with somebody else who's interested in not just the science, but the art behind it of dealing with people. So just appreciate you and your time.
All right. All the best. Have a great afternoon or morning, and wherever you're listening, feel free to reach out to me if you want to connect with Ali. Reach out to Ali through Art of Coaching as well. And Ali, off air, I'll grab your contact information for people to connect with you sort of directly as well. So that'll be in the notes for the podcast. Thank you so much. Have a great morning. Have a great afternoon. Have a great evening wherever you are. Stay connected. Thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this community. Check us out online, firststartherapy.com. That's FIRSTAR therapy.com. Or email us with feedback, consult@firststartherapy.com. CONSULT@firststartherapy.com. On Instagram @firststar.therapy, and our podcast host @letschat.at. This is First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast.